You almost killed me. I almost killed you.
I your wife.
She's dead now, but she blew up. So we're okay. We're cool, right? So yeah, I thought that was
awkward as hell. This week, Nerd Legion is revisiting Shogun, one of the shows that we have deemed worthy of coming back to after doing the first 4 episodes. Yeah, and it was great.
It was great. I really liked this show. The more I watched it, the more I liked it. It was funny because the first 4 episodes, like, I thought it was good and everything, but it didn't really like hook me totally, But then going back and watching like the last 6 for this, I was like, oh my gosh, the last 2 episodes especially were fantastic. So yeah, I really like the show. And I think this, more than anything, is the Anna Sawai Nerd Legion redemption story, right? Because we were very hard on her for her performance in Monarch: Legacy of Monsters.
She was terrible though, but also we did caveat it last episode by saying that her role in that show really sucked and the writing was terrible, and it just goes to show because she is great in this. 偉大なる武将、明智陳斎の娘にございまする。1000年続く侍の末裔として、私はどこに閉じ込められることも、人質になることも、囚われることもありませぬ。
Yeah, well, that's why I always have a hard time being tough on actors, because there's only, and we know this too from being in show business, so to speak, with esports, and you don't have as much control over the presentation of the product you're a part of as you want to, and sometimes, say you join a league where they tell you that you can consult and have a lot of control over things like talent rosters and the creative side of it, and then you get there and they tell you to just shut up and cast. Sometimes that happens to two young naive esports casters, right? And so you're doing the best you can, but the product that's going out isn't really what you want it to be, So you leave eventually. But so that's why I have a hard time, being hard on these actors. But Anna Sawai, she was also in the Fast saga a little bit. She is a Fast and the Furious universe character. Not her herself, but she has a character named Elle in the movies. There you go. So I love the Fast and the Furious franchise. So
it's one of your great flaws.
It's one of my great assets, I would say. She was also in Pachinko, which is really an awesome show too, about sort of the relationship between Korea and the U.S. and Japan over the course of the last 100 years or so, and kind of like one family's journey through those 3 sort of cultures. That's a fantastic show, and she's great in it. Monarch: Legacy of Monsters, again, her character was written very poorly. I think she was doing the best she can, looking back on that now. But Shogun, yeah, absolutely like an all-star performance. Definitely one I think that'll go down as a really, really awesome role and really well-acted show in general.
I think, honestly, though, I would be really surprised if she didn't win some awards for this role, especially with the conclusion of Mariko's arc in this show and the kind of acting job she does, especially at the end. It does seem kind of like Emmy baits for a lot of these actors. I mean, clearly, like the next time the Emmys roll around, we're going to see probably quite a few people receiving awards, like Anna Sawai in particular. Also. Hiroyuki Sanada, probably, who plays Toranaga.
You're right. We're talking about Shogun. Yeah. Yep. There was
we already got
into
Kombat
characters in this.
I know we already got into the Mortal Kombat characters last time because you haven't seen the latest Mortal Kombat movie.
I watched a little bit of it today. Actually, I had a little bit of time, so I tried to. And it was funny seeing Yobushige as Lord Raiden. I was like, wow, that's a different role for him. But everything was really good with this. It's so funny because I was watching some of the making of stuff and all that, and they were like, well, it's really like incredible that everyone's like that the Japanese actors are speaking Japanese in this show. It's so original. And I'm like, yeah, but like a lot of people prefer to watch anime and honestly other movies in the native languages of the actors. And I suppose to a certain extent it's an American made show and they chose to go with the original language, but like still, I didn't even think about that. I was like, well, yeah, they're Japanese. Why wouldn't they be speaking Japanese? But apparently this was a huge thing to people. Now people are finally realizing why, people prefer mostly to watch anime in the original language, or to watch like a lot of other foreign language films, is what they call them, in the original languages, because you get so much more of the emotional intent from the dialogue. Even if you can't necessarily understand it, it hits in the right way if you're hearing it in the original language, I think. So
honestly, this would also just be super weird if it was all in English, just because the main function of Blackthorne in the story is to be the fish out of water and not understand fully what's going on around him. So, like, it would have to be really awkward in terms of whenever Blackthorne was around, he'd have to pretend he wasn't understanding what was going on, or they'd have to switch to Japanese only when he was around, and then when he's not around, switch back to English. So it would be really awkward and also terrible. So in the end, like, this was absolutely the right choice. As we said in the last episode, using English for the Portuguese, even though English is not actually spoken at any point really during this show. Possibly except for Blackthorne's little asides to himself where he's cursing. But for the most part, Portuguese is the language that is depicted as English, so we don't have to read subtitles for the entirety of the show. And also so we can have English-speaking actors or bilingual Japanese-English actors who are probably a lot more common, I'm going to go ahead and guess, than an actor who is bilingual in Portuguese and Japanese.
Yeah, that's probably slightly more rare, but it did just strike me as funny reading and kind of seeing people talk about how amazing it is to hear actors speaking their native languages, and I'm like, I don't know, that sounds kind of like what you normally want, right? But but then again, like a lot of other movies over the years obviously didn't do that. When they were made by American production companies. So this is different in that regard. But yeah, it was funny. I didn't even think about that until I saw that in some interviews and things. But again, like we touched on that before, and you just did, where the use of translation was such a core element in the story, where it's it's a good way to sort of differentiate the languages, and create this sort of like a little bit more tense environment for Cosmo Jarvis as John Blackthorne, who's definitely not a pirate. But it also really goes a long way as the series goes on into the ongoing theme of loyalty and trust, because trust goes right down to like constantly wondering if this person translating for you is translating accurately. And you see in the show, sometimes yes, sometimes no, So it really is a show about, trust to a certain extent too. And loyalty all the way ultimately. Down. Yeah. And that goes all the way down to just the things people are saying to each other at the most basic level, at the language level. So I thought that was a really interesting dynamic in the show that they kind of, kept going with throughout the entire series. Mariko殿、これよりこのバテレンの通詞を務めよ。キリシタン教会は我が味方にあらず、火の元の言葉を喋りよっても。
Yeah. And we did end after episode 4, so this is a 10-episode long series. But I did have a chuckle, Doa, as I told you previously, because at the end you were saying, oh, obviously Mariko's husband is not dead.
Oh, yeah.
At the end of episode 4. And I laughed because I, as I had told you privately, like I had already seen episode 5 by the next time we spoke. And literally the very first thing that happens in episode 5 is the reveal that Mariko's husband is in fact not dead. So it was just funny because they didn't waste any time at all coming to your conclusion. They just
which is good. I'm glad they just got right to it, right? Because like everyone knows in a show like this where people are getting like blown apart by cannons and decapitated all the time and stuff like that, if a character is killed, quote unquote, off camera, they're not dead. They're absolutely not dead. So yeah, that was obvious that he was coming back. Buntaro was coming back with a vengeance, and he did. No shock there. Yeah.
Mariko-san, you should move. Mariko-san, move! Mariko-san!
Wow.
So I think we obviously have a lot of ground to cover in this episode, and we should probably just go, pretty quickly to the end, because the entire purpose of this is that basically we're seeing all of Toranaga's various machinations and the political intrigue that is happening within the courts. You know, John Blackthorne honestly takes a pretty big backseat to most of the action that happens in the latter half of the series, and it's really much more about you know, Mariko and Toranaga and Yabushige and some of these other characters that kind of take center stage, as well as the other regents, or the 5 regents, and we get introduced to Toranaga's brother, who becomes one of the regents and kind of betrays him in the end. But yeah, this is, I mean, it really is excellent, like kind of deep political intrigue. And if the first half of the series is much more about setting up the world, and we talked extensively about the history of the world in the last episode, so go back and, you know, we talk a lot about like what the actual, you know, what was happening in 1600 in both Japan and in the West, and kind of dive into that. We're not going to go and rehash that right now. And this is really just about everything, like the context has been set, and now it's just about really character interactions.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's cool to see too that like John Blackthorne, it's very much not, because I know a lot of people were worried about this that hadn't seen it. It's not a Last Samurai situation where Tom Cruise is the main character, right? He's very much one of the characters, but not the main character, right? He serves as our avatar, as the non-Japanese viewer in this world, right? Where he's the one who can, you know, sort of be surprised by the cultural things, and he's going through this kind of like alien experience to him. And to a certain extent is kind of the avatar of a lot of the audience. Because, I mean, and even if you are a Japanese person watching this, you didn't live back then, right? So things are still a little bit different. So
and the language is different too.
I mean, exactly.
I think it applies older dialect.
To a certain extent, it applies to everybody. So he kind of fills that role. But like you said, he does get relegated to kind of asking for his ship back duty for for a lot of the series, which is funny. You know, it's like every episode you got to have the Anjin asks Toranaga for his ship back, and Toranaga says, "No, don't waste my time." And then they just burn it. Spoiler
and
alert,
Toranaga just secretly bombs it, and then uses it as an excuse to root out people who are disloyal to him in the village. And he just tells Yabushige right before he commits suicide that this is what he did, and then won't actually tell him the truth about his intentions, which is a very nice twist at the end.
Yeah, you know, it turns out it was, as we kind of, because again, I feel like it's funny because things happened in episodes like 5 through 8, certainly, but it really is like the last 2 episodes of the series that really like stand out to me out of the last 6, you know? So I feel like I just want to jump and talk about those.
Well, that's because the episodes are set up for the ultimate drama that comes to the fore. And really it is about you know, Toranaga's plan to basically win this war before it's even fought, which is, by the way, I mean, we're going to spoil right to the end. I mean, the battle is not fought. The historical battle is actually not fought at the end of this show. And it was the Battle of Sekigahara, which is the actual battle where the Tokugawa won and created the Tokugawa shogunate that lasted for a couple of hundred years afterwards. But in this show, effectively, like, they show a premonition of that battle, of what's going to happen. But it doesn't actually end with the combat. It doesn't end with Toranaga becoming shogun. It really is like so well done, though, that I think it's a very interesting choice within the context of this series, but also a really, I think, profoundly powerful one, because in this way you really appreciate Toranaga's genius, because you realize that he doesn't have to fight the war now.
Yeah, I mean, they don't show you the end because the end is presented as inevitable at that point,
which ties into all of the fates talk that goes on within this show.
But I think it also makes Toranaga's character, you know, that much more impressive as a character. Is that, like, this guy he has got everyone in his pocket, to the extent that we don't even need to show you him like truly achieve his goal of Shogun, his victory in the end, because of course he does, you know. And I think I haven't read a lot of the reviews for this show yet, or really, I haven't really read any of the reviews for the show yet. But it's I would suspect that some people are going to not be happy with that choice because a lot of people would want the big battle.
Well, I mean, if you're coming from Game of Thrones, I mean, obviously, like, you know, the Battle of the Bastards and some of the big set piece battles at the end of that show, or I guess in the middle in some cases. But I mean, you really did have these very climactic engagements that were extremely impressive, elaborately choreographed, beautifully shot.
That's not what this show is all about, though.
No.
Yeah, that's not what this show is about. This show is about individual character motivations and like we mentioned before, the topic of loyalty and how far people would go to be loyal, including committing seppuku, which does not look very fun. It does not look like a good time, but you know, Toranaga's got a lot of people who are down for that. So, yeah.
Well, I think what's so cool about Toranaga's ultimate victory is that what's so fascinating about his character is that they set up the premise of having the secret heart earlier in the show, right? Which is basically the desire that you do not verbalize to anybody. And Mariko I believe it was Mariko who's explaining to Blackthorne kind of the concept of, you know, the different stages of the self, where you have kind of your outward facing one, and then the one where you discuss your kind of intimate desires with other people, and then you have the one that you tell nobody at all. And I think what's so interesting at the end of this is we never know really what Toranaga's you know, innermost thought is, because when Yabushige is going to kill himself and asks straight up, do you want to be Shogun in your secret heart? He says, what is the point of telling the future to a dead man? And then just has him commit suicide before answering.
本当のことを語ってくだされ。墓場まで持ってまいりますり。
Because the thing that he says to his close confidants is, I am trying to create a Japan basically without war, without conflict. I'm trying to end conflict. And in that way, his ideals seem noble. And he actually causes other people to buy into this. You know, notably Hiramatsu, who is his advisor, who ends up killing himself as an act of deception to convince everyone else that Toranaga's intention is to surrender when his real intention is to fight. It's when he sends Mariko effectively to her death in order to take this last stand to sow dissent among the other regents and the people who are imprisoned within Osaka Castle, right? And these are the two master strokes that he has, but they require the sacrifice of people. And these people are willing to do it because they agree with ending his conflict and ending kind of Ishido's like reign of terror effectively. And they believe his intention to be noble. But underneath all of this, Doa, is this really brilliant and like delicious morsel where we don't know if it's actually just for power or not. We don't know.
Yeah, it's a little bit. It seems a bit sinister. It seems a little bit. It seems more than a little bit scary at times. The power that this person has over people, and it's. I think that's part of it too. Is the power of personality, right? Where it's like, you know, when you encounter these very charismatic speakers that you know, they can sway a lot of people to their way of thinking, even if it seems odd, even if it seems, you know, against the you know, the standard flow of things. Like, you have to be very careful, I think, and try to suss out what their true intentions are, you know, because it can get you in a lot of trouble otherwise. So yeah, I think, because at the beginning, I believe the entire conflict begins because the other regents are concerned that his lands are getting a little bit too big, that he's consolidating a little bit too much power.
He's taken additional consorts and he is raising more military power. So he is being provocative.
Yeah. So you could say on the one hand, you know, he kind of seems to position things as, hey, I'm just growing my estates. I'm just Toranaga company is just doing well right now. You know, why are you messing with me? Just leave me alone. We're at a council of regents. There's nothing you need to worry about. But at the same time, you know, he could be doing that to push them into this entire conflict, which he sort of has planned out in advance and goes his way. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those shows where it's like, you know, are they the hero? Are they really the villain? Like, do they have altruistic motives in certain cases, but then very selfish motives in other cases? And I think at the end, you've got a certain amount of complexity to all the characters in the show as far as that goes, where nobody is like truly pure evil in that show, and nobody is like truly purely good in that show either. Everyone just kind of has their motivations, and we get to see kind of how they all play out. And I like shows like that a lot. It's one of the reasons why Princess Mononoke is one of my favorite animes too, because it's like, I feel like even the people who are presented as villainous from time to time still are just kind of doing it because they think their course of action is the best, and some of their motives are, noble, even if it does put them in conflict with some of the other characters in the show or in the movie. So yeah, I like things like this a lot. Looking at people's perspectives, how those clash, and kind of the result of that. But ultimately, Toranaga, the mastermind, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? There's a gray area there,
I mean, he's clearly an exceptional leader, though, and a very thoughtful one. But at a certain point, Doa, I think the show asks, does it matter? Does it matter that if his secret desire is to be shogun and he is power hungry? Does it matter if he actually is going to end the conflict and is going to end the bloodshed and end the war? Doesn't matter, because if that goal is accomplished and he's shogun, like, nobody's dying anymore, right? And these rather silly, these silly political games that are going on. And I think there's a clarity to the situation.
John Blackthorne kind of is the person who's sort of like asking that question too, like, do the ends justify the means, right? Everybody's like offing themselves here and there, like once or twice per episode, and he's like, what in the world is going on? Like, is life so cheap, But because he doesn't share the same concept of what loyalty entails that they do, obviously. When we get to the end of the show, he certainly does, but it takes him a long time to get there, and he's sort of that person asking, like, is this all worth it, And I think that's kind of the ultimate question with these kind of things is you bring peace to a nation, but you bring it, on a field of bodies, right? Like,
not
was
that many,
all
things considered.
Well, I mean, there was like yeah, sure, comparatively, but now we're getting the value. What is the value of a single human life, Which is another, kind of thing that John Blackthorne brings up as he's John Sparrowing around, or Jack Sparrowing around the screen.
That he does like have that like Jack Sparrow kind of just like wobbling around. It's a little weird and off-putting. I'm not sure I really agree with it. You brought it up last time, but it becomes just more kind of obvious the longer you watch this guy in this show.
He has this like overly bewildered expression on his face through a lot of it, and I'm like, all right, I understand the purpose of this.
Well, to be fair, but, I mean, it was probably just very realistic for him because he was standing there on set with everybody else speaking Japanese, not having a fucking idea what was going on. So I think his experience.
He was probably like, yeah, I have no idea what's happening. Yeah. I mean, the funny thing, I thought it was really funny towards the end when him and Yoshige were talking to each other, and they were saying things and then being like, you understand? And the other one would be like, yeah, I understand. Even though they totally didn't understand, because like when I lived in Korea and you're in Korea, well, you're in Korea right now most of the time, but like, we know that there's definitely points where you're tired and this person is speaking to you very quickly in Korean. Yeah. Or it's like a company party after finals. That does happen. And you're like catching, it's exactly like it is in the show where you catch like 2 or 3 words out of like a paragraph and they're like, do you understand at the end? And you're like, yeah, absolutely. I got it. But you're saying that because you're not going to have to prove that you understood what they just said. So, and then you say something to them and they'll be like, yeah, okay, for sure. I understand that. I felt like that was one of the most real moments of the show, which is 2 people who don't really know each other's languages telling each other that they totally understand what the last person just said. That happens a lot. So that was fun.
石堂様。Asu. Hi. Yabushige, thank you for trusting me. When I deliver to you the Catholic gold, you won't regret it. Wakarika.
My wife hates it when I do that. She'll speak to me in Korean sometimes, and she can tell now because like a lot of times, like, and I will think that I understand what she's saying sometimes. Because I'll catch what I think to be enough words, but she knows, like she has just a 6th sense now when I'm like, oh yeah, I get it. And she's like, did you really understand? Tell me what I just told you. And I'd be like, oh, you said you like dogs, right? And she was like, no, I said I like it when dogs stay away from me. You know, it's something like that. You know, I admit she catches me on that one once in a while. Yeah.
So also going back to Yabashige, I mean, he actually has one of the more interesting arcs too, because he's trying to play both sides for most of the show. And eventually, I mean, I don't think he's terribly subtle, but both sides effectively box him in and figure him out, because Ishido basically calls him out and then gets him to let the assassins in to the compound where it gets very complicated, where Blackthorne and Mariko and then also Toranaga's consort are staying at Osaka Castle when they've been in prison.
And the other regents even.
Yeah, and the other regents. And so there's that aspect of it too, where, you know, he is then basically the ultimate betrayer of the people within the castle. And then that eventually is figured out because people saw him kind of opening the doors for these assassins to come in, and quite clearly not killing him, by the way, as they killed a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
And that gets back to Toranaga. But, you know, he is a fascinating guy, because it just goes to show, like, on a long enough timeline, you will be sussed out in this situation. You do actually have to pick a side.
Well, it's so I feel like he's, to a certain extent, he's almost the comic relief a little bit too, where it's like he's really trying to be subtle and play these games, but like everybody knows what he's doing. And then he's also kind of the victim of circumstance in a lot of these situations too. So he kind of just spends every episode being like, oh, now I got to change this plan. He's like constantly frustrated. It's kind of funny, actually. But, you know, if you're familiar with Transformers, you probably know the character Starscream. And he is basically the Starscream of this series, where he's always sort of like scheming to get ahead against against the people who he's supposed to be serving. And they know he's doing it the entire time, and they just keep like putting him down, but he just keeps trying it and just getting frustrated. And then he eventually dies at the end, just like Starscream was killed by Megatron in Transformers the movie in 1986. Toranaga does eventually, cause the demise of Yabashige. So
what a beautiful analogy, Noah.
I do what I can, you know.
What a beautiful analogy.
They say, speak to what you know.
And you know, animated 80s Transformers movies.
I do.
Very good.
Yeah. At least that one. That was the biggest animated Transformers movie from the 80s for sure. Yeah. Great movie, by the way.
So I think we should talk a little bit about some of possible complaints that we have about this show, because we did carry on about how unnecessary we thought the Blackthorne Mariko romance was, and it is entirely unnecessary in this show.
I mean, it does. It is a primary driver towards his sort of like understanding of this culture, I would say. So for his character, I will say my mind on that was partially changed, because I felt like I said, it was a main driver of his character's change throughout the series.
Because you could also achieve that in different ways, right? With different character interactions. I think
you gotta have a little. I mean, when was this book written? Like, I'm sure you got
1975.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't actually know if this romance was in the book or not, to be fair.
I assume that it was.
But my issues with it are really that it just kind of gets shoehorned in at the very end, and there's a lot more significant plot actions that are happening at the end of the show. And so having him suddenly confess his affection and then spend one night together and then have her die, like all in the same very short time period,
it was very Hollywood.
Feels real weird, and like everything's moving a bit too quickly.
There were some things like that weren't, I mean, obviously this book is much bigger than this series was able to be. It seems like things like Toranaga's brother, he just sort of shows up out of nowhere and then becomes a character for like a really important character for like an episode, and then you don't see him again for like the entire rest of the show except for like one scene. Yeah, he's like around, and he has like 2 lines of dialogue for like the rest of the series basically. But yeah, the romance thing too, it was very sort of just inserted in there. But you know, again, I feel like it did provide an important moment, an important driver for his character motivation. But yeah, sure, you could have done it a different way. But you know, sometimes you gotta do. I just thought it was kind of funny at the end there, where he was like pulling the ship out of the ocean with everybody, and then Buntaro walks up and he's like, they're like, well. That happened. You want a drink? Like, sure, bro. Let's pull the ship out of the sea. I'm like, okay, everything's cool, bro. Fist bump.
Right. Yes. Yes, this is wonderful. Raise the ropes!
You almost killed me. I almost killed you.
I fucked your wife.
She's dead now. You know, but she blew up. So we're okay. We're cool, right? So yeah, I thought that was
awkward as hell.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a quicker resolution to that.
By the way, I really hated. Yeah. I understand why they did the dream sequence where he was injured after she died, and he's having this dream about him being old and back in England, and like his grandkids are running around, and he's holding on to the cross and the rosary that Mariko gave him, like on his deathbed. And then obviously we know that's a dream because he eventually drops it into the ocean when he's on the boat. And they're kind of, you know, honoring the dead. And so we know, because it's a symbol, right? Because he's clutching onto this and it shows him back in England. But as we know from Toranaga, who basically says, I think it's his fate to stay in Japan. Yeah. You know, him dropping that in the ocean is basically a sign that he is going to stay in Japan. And that's what his fate or his intent is at that point in time. And he does seem that there's very little for him to go back to now. First off, he would have to rebuild this ship and hope he could make it back home. Second off, he kind of burned the bridge with the other white guys in Japan and his crew. Yeah. You know, tries to go back to them, and then they immediately accuse him of basically getting them into this predicament, and he gets into a brutal fist fight with one of the crew members. So it seems like, you know, that's not going to happen. They also would need additional crew, so they have to convince probably Japanese people to come on board this ship. So it does seem far-fetched that he's going to be getting home anytime in the next several years at the very least.
Yabushige totally would have gone along. He wasn't dead. Oh, well. That would have
Yabushige did beg him to take him to England.
That would have been a great sitcom. It's John Blackthorne and Yabushige in London. I would have.
Sorry, we'll get that with Blue Eye Samurai, though. Don't worry about it. Like,
oh. Yeah, to a certain extent, I suppose, but I feel like that's not going to be very funny.
Oh, they'll definitely.
Probably.
Doa, they will not be able to resist the fish out of water, you know, Japanese samurai in London comedy in Blue Eye Samurai season 2. You know that.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you know, just imagine John Blackthorne and Yabushige, like, partying it up around the world, being pirates and stuff. Like, that would be a pretty cool show. I'd be down for that. We'll never get it now. But on a historical note, the person that John Blackthorne was based on did end up living the rest of his life in Japan. And despite having family back in England, apparently married someone else in Japan and had a new family there as well. So yeah,
scandalous.
He was, yeah, I know, right? Ooh, wow. But yeah, he stuck around. So yeah. But I did think the dream sequences were just a little bit odd, because it was, at first I was like, oh, well, does this mean, like, is this a flash forward? Does he live? And then, you know, are we kind of Saving Private Ryaning this, where we're looking at the old version of the main character now for a moment? And then, like, that doesn't happen. You're like, oh, okay. So he was just sort of imagining this, I guess. But, you know, Yeah, I didn't really feel like it served a huge purpose. You brought up that it showed that he was like committed to staying in Japan, but I feel like we would have gotten that when he drops the cross off in the boat, regardless of if we'd seen those dream sequences.
It was just bad. It was just kind of badly done. Is really the problem. Is it seemed super cheesy and him just being super old and just vibrating in a bed. It was just it felt. This show has such immense production quality behind the costumes and the sets and everything that it looked just fucking fake, and that was my biggest problem with it. It looked
like
so
a bad
tacky.
Zombie from it looked like a bad zombie from like a zombie film waking up, like runaway grandkids. It's like it was just a very strange couple scenes to throw in there. And I don't feel like it added a lot, but they were there, so. Hey, I still want my John Blackthorne pirate series, but we're not going to get that. People want a season 2 for this show.
What?
I'm like, no, yeah, people do. I mean, of course, they're asking. Anytime a show is successful, you could have the entire cast die, and then people, if it's a good show, people are like, well, when's season 2 coming out? But. So yeah, people want season 2. The directors had to answer questions about if there'll be a season 2, and they're basically just like, well. There isn't really anything else to do, but who knows, maybe, I guess, is the vibe I got from reading what they were saying. But yeah, like, we don't need a season 2 of this. Just leave it be. It's such a nice story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it doesn't need to have any more in it. And one of the worst things about streaming content right now, miniseries like this, is that people always want more. It's like cake, when you were a kid or something like that. The first piece is great. Piece 5, you're like feeling disgusting. Your parents are disappointed in you. You're going to get cavities and stuff like that. So it's like, it's the old too much of a good thing. If you really love this series, be happy that you've got it and you've seen it. Don't just keep asking for more, because it's not always the best thing. Cough, cough, Mandalorian season 3, cough, cough.
I still haven't seen any of the Mandalorian, so I'm avoiding that one.
But you will, because we're definitely going to watch whenever the new season comes out, whenever that is, and we're going to watch. Well, we're going to watch all the Star Wars stuff that comes out. Obviously,
I look forward to your explanations about what is happening, as I definitely am not going to watch the first 3 seasons to prepare for it.
I'll be ready. I'll be like, so at this one point, Grogu is piloting the sort of like dead robot body of one of his friends, but he's in it like a little mech. We'll get there. There's a little taste for you.
This sounds terrible. This is why I'm not watching that show.
It was terrible. The first 2 seasons, great. But you know what I heard? If we can go on a little Mandalorian side trip here, a side quest, if you will, the Mandalorian, the lore goes, was only supposed to be 2 seasons. And the way the second season ends, you can see where that should have been the end of it. But they didn't count on the extreme marketability of a cute baby Yoda. And apparently Disney demanded more. So they had to go back and just write more, and write more they did. But it wasn't great. And yeah, apparently that's why in the middle of Book of Boba Fett, there were suddenly 2 Mandalorian episodes. It's kind of out of nowhere, because they're like, well, now we need a bridge to explain kind of like how season 3 is set up for the Mandalorian. So they just yoinked 2 episodes of Book of Boba Fett to make that happen, which probably made that whole show worse. It's a mess, right? But that said, I am looking forward to watching the Acolyte, because the High Republic is a very cool era. So that'll be fun. It'll be fun to get hundreds of years away from.
Yeah, I really think that's what I'm looking forward to, is just exploring the universe in different ways, because it's all been so wrapped up in the same, kind of 20-year period almost.
Mm-hmm. You'll still see Yoda though. Yoda will still be in that, but he's the only one, because he would only be like 500, 600 years old at that point.
Fair enough.
So yeah, so that's kind of, I think that's a little bit neat that like Yoda, it will help you realize just how long Yoda has been in this universe, which explains why he's so insane in Empire Strikes Back. Because if I had lived 900 years and ended up on a swamp planet, I'd probably go a little bit crazy too. Don't say it was just a test. He was a little bit nutty, Yoda.
Anyway, back to
Shogun.
An actual good TV series.
Back to our serious dramatic period piece. Yeah.
This show is just fabulous basically in every way, from the acting perspective that we started off talking on the show to the costumes just keep getting better as the show goes on. I was just astounded at the level of detail in some of the outfits of these characters and how fucking cool everybody looked in this show. The number of costume changes they have is also crazy. The filming is super good. I mean, there's some violence in this show, but the fight scenes are really interesting, particularly the fight scene with Mariko when she's trying to leave and all of the drama surrounding, I thought it was really brilliant tension, because this is high political intrigue where you're trapping these nobles, but you can't actually say that you're trapping them. So who's going to call the bluff of somebody who's imprisoning you? Because everybody knows that they're being held hostage, but nobody's actually saying that there's hostages or even really implying it, right? And then so to actually test the waters on that, be willing to put her life on the line, is one of the fucking best scenes in the entire show. It's absolutely brilliant. She does a great job of acting it.
And it's the funny thing is it's another example of sort of the inevitability of how events play out, because he's not going to let her leave. So the only question is like, how many people are going to die to get to that point, right? So it's got this very sort of bleak feeling to all of it, because it's essentially she's sure it's a victory for Toranaga in that it's a political victory, but it's bleak because it's clearly a loss for the people who are dying in this,
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, because we don't actually know when the assassins come in if the intention is to kill Mariko or not, because it looks like when they find her that they're trying to kidnap her and not kill her, because they don't try and kill her, they try and pick her up and take her away. And because it's so everything is just really left quite vague and open to interpretation in this series, which I really like. So are they trying to kill her? Are they trying to kidnap her? What was Ishido's ultimate plan? I like Doa how he tries to basically say it's a false flag he creates a false flag operation and says it's Toranaga who sent the assassins, because that would make him look bad and put him in this impossible situation, because it's almost as though, even though we know Ishido did it because Fukushige enables the plan, and Ishido told him, we know Ishido basically told him to do it, and he kills the guards and he opens the doors and everything like that. But it's interesting that Ishido tries to kind of pawn this off as Toranaga being brilliant at scheming. And you know what, Doa? It's not even crazy to think that Toranaga would do something like this. Basically to undermine the alliances and cause distrust among the regions. Because the whole purpose of this is basically if we are nobles and we are not safe within this system anymore, then Ishido can't be trusted, which is ultimately what causes the break with the regent and his mother.
Well, it's another good example of the way the show demonstrated that Toranaga was just like a level above everybody else in terms of manipulation and political intrigue, because in cooking terms, everybody had the same ingredients, but Toranaga knew how to finesse them into the best possible flavor, where everyone else is just mashing it together with their hands. They've got the same resources and the same kind of information, but they just aren't using it as effectively and aren't speaking as eloquently as Toranaga is. So Ishido trying to pin this on Toranaga, just the way he does it, comes off as sort of ham-handedly, right? Which is just another example that everyone's just outclassed by Toranaga. He is just that much better at just manipulating everyone than everyone else is. So yeah, I thought that was cool too, that it was just yet another way to show Toranaga was this a epic political maneuverer, one little thing that I wasn't as much of a fan of is kids just popping up out of nowhere, because that one episode, Mariko's son I don't think we didn't see him in the entire series.
No,
right?
no, he was there earlier too. He was there earlier for brief scenes.
I didn't even remember him, and then he just shows up and he's like, "Hey, you're just gonna dishonor us all," and I'm like, okay, well, so they're only making him show up to just ratchet up the drama to that it
did feel rather forced
level. Yeah, I feel like they didn't need it,
It's like, hey, Mom, I don't like you. You're dishonoring me now. I'm like, shut the fuck up, kid.
It's like, who is this kid? I don't even remember who he is, I seriously did not even remember this person was in the series. So I felt like that was, it was just in there to be like, really, this is dramatic. It's really tough for her. It's like, I already know. You've already established that plenty well, I thought, you know?
Yeah.
If you try to leave today, you will be held. And if you are disgraced,
so I'm watching it, right? I'm watching this on Hulu, you know, and we're trying to be frugal right now in our household, you know, new house, new baby, all that kind of stuff. So I've got ads on, you know. I'm admitting we have ads on Hulu, and this is the reason why TV is such a weird medium, is that when ads are involved, you have things like the romance scene between John Blackthorne and Mariko happens, and then the dramatic fight, and she blows up and all that, and then right after that, it jumps into a happy-go-lucky milk commercial, right? And I was like, whoa, this is some tonal whiplash here. It's like, that is something only television can deliver, is extreme, you know. It becomes almost like a Monty Python episode, where it's like, and now for something completely different, you know. So yeah, it is weird, because I haven't had a cable subscription for well over a decade now, for like 15 years probably, you know. So and you know, until recently, I was just, you know, paying for everything ad free, because nobody wants to watch ads. But for this one thing, I still have ad free on everything else. But I didn't watch Hulu aside from the show, so I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna pick it up as cheaply as possible to watch Shogun,
sure,
and that's it. And so getting ads during this show is the most insane, like I said, emotional tonal whiplash, right? Because you have like you know, seppuku cut off the head, and then it's like, is diarrhea improving your life? It's like, of course not, you know. Where it's like, hey, hey, Junior, welcome to breakfast. Here's some milk. And you're like, did you see the last scene? Like, Mariko exploded. She like put herself against that door. She wanted to die again.
Yeah, just death wish for the whole show, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. She was really, I mean, you know, like, don't let your dreams become memes. You know, if you just keep trying.
By the way, I loved that scene with Buntaro, her husband, where he suggests that they kill themselves together, and she tells him that she would literally rather live 1,000 years than die together with him. I was like, holy shit. That
I don't know. I'm no relationship expert, Monty, but I've got a feeling their marriage is has some strife going on.
But I just loved that scene, Doa, because first off, the actor who played Buntaro was like actually really believably kind of hurt by that. But you have to remember that he's been an asshole who was beating her previously in the show, and that it got, you know, Toranaga involved in their relationship. You know, is publicly humiliating for him after he beat, because he did it in Blackthorne's house after he beat Mariko, and so had to kind of get on his knees and apologize for that as a loss of honor. But this guy, like, obviously hasn't been a good husband and was abusive, not, you know, physically, psychologically. Got drunk and shot an arrow that almost killed her.
Like, clearly he was not a good person.
But I mean, you know, there was still that desperation to have a closeness with her. And you could, I really thought the actor did a good job, because you could like see his soul shatter when she said that. And also it was very meaningful for her to say that, because she has been begging him for death for a decade plus, basically, we know. And she has been denied that. And when he finally offers it to her, it's not in the condition that she wants. And so she rejects it because she hates him so much, which is, I mean, it's just a chilling scene, I thought.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it just shows, you know, I think the horror of an abusive relationship, right? Where a lot of times the abuser, you know, will not understand, like, well, there's different levels obviously to this, but like, one is, you know, they won't feel like they can control themselves, and so they'll find ways to justify what they're doing, you know, blame the other person or something like that. Other things is like where they genuinely care about the person but can't stop from doing this, and they're ashamed that they do this, but they are that way for whatever reason has caused them to be this way. So I feel like you see that with his character, that like he, there is a part of him that wants to take care of her and wants to, be a good husband, but he's also this horrible abuser too, And so you can see how that has shattered him too, right? But just extremely well acted. I feel like you could see a lot of depth in that character through that one scene. I didn't really care about that character up until that scene, actually, where I was like, yeah, he's just a bully, he's just kind of like that guy, right? But then that scene, you're like, oh, well, it's it's his life is tragic too,
Well,
So
it is
I
too,
like
because
to that,
his father is Hiramatsu, who also commits suicide, right? And
Right.
so, when
see that,
his father dies, it seems like he doesn't really have a great relationship with his and Mariko's son either. He's never had a good relationship with his wife. It seems like most of the other characters like actively don't like him.
Yeah, because he's obviously like a bully and an abuser, So yeah,
And he doesn't seem like a fun dude to be around or like have a drink with.
No, not really. No. But that's just the great thing about this show, is that even characters like that are, he's not a main character. He's like a high level side character, but he's still got more depth than a lot of main characters in other shows have. So that's what I really appreciate about this series, is that you really feel like you get to know nearly every character, right? And that's, I think the show just does a great job of doing a lot with a little, right? This is a show that really maximizes what you can do with a miniseries, I think more shows should be 10 episodes, by the way. I think this like 6, 8 trend, like just give it an even 10. I feel like that's the amount of hours you truly need.
Well, it's also, I think that many shows are 8 episodes, but then they're planned to have a second season. I think this really closes the story arc on this show. And I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed that people would be asking for a second season of this show, because it's completely unnecessary. And frankly, Doa, I would much rather see, a different Japanese period piece with the same, maybe with some of the same actors or with the same showrunners, because I think you could do different things set in feudal Japan. I mean, look how much stuff we've done on this show recently that's been set in feudal Japan. It's obviously just like, fruitful ground for storytelling. So
Totally.
if you're interested in this, like maybe there's a way that there could be a new story told, but it really just feels like this is done, right?
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, the people that want another season are the people that feel like they got ripped off and didn't get the big battles they were promised and all that kind of stuff, And,
but it's almost, but I think that's what's so interesting about this show, is that the actual crowning of Toranaga as Shogun is unnecessary.
Yeah,
it's not. That's not the theme of the show. The theme of the show, it's not just a plot. It's not a feel good like war plot where you get to see him accomplish all of his goals, and then it ends and there's a big party and he's Shogun and everybody clapped. Right? It's about it's about what it takes to become the Shogun. That's what it's about. And it's much more powerful that way, because as we've touched on, it's all of the themes of sacrifice, ends justifying the means, potentially abusing your followers' loyalty, being clever, being honorable, because at the end of the day, Toranaga is quite honorable in the actions that he commits, and he plays by the rules of Japanese culture at that time, right? And I don't think he
life, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think he devalues life. I think that it's a core part of the show is the different perceptions of life and death, and that death can have meaning in and of itself, which is what Mariko says over and over again. And the question of, is the sacrifice of Mariko a kindness? Because she wants to die. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, like I feel like the typical American viewer, because we like our happy endings, would really wanted her to sort of like come out of this darkness on the other side and like, get away from her abusive husband, get with John Blackthorne. That would be the typical Hollywood arc, but that's not very realistic in a lot of cases, So it's interesting to see a show, and I would imagine the book too, kind of like go that route. But it does bring things to a conclusion, for that character in a way that feels satisfying, which is refreshing, because nothing is less satisfying than endless non-conclusions that a lot of shows with just infinity seasons tend to have. So I really appreciate that this is just one season. It's yet another reason I'm excited on another Star Wars note that they've already said publicly that Andor will only be 2 seasons. And
great. Actually, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, they wrote the story. It will fit in 2 seasons, and that's it. They're not going to do any more. That is they have the entire thing planned out, and that's just all it is, which is great. It turns out you have a better show when you don't have to just constantly write things in a way where you could continue them if you want to, you know? So, yeah. But like I said, the people that want another season for this are the people that were expecting this big military spectacle. They were expecting, Last Samurai, Kingdom of Heaven, you name it, right? And to a certain extent, I do feel like the advertising for this show led you to believe you were going to get that, because it was a lot of like military images and troops and things like that, and guys with swords out and stuff.
I mean, even the promotional poster is, a samurai with his arm out holding the sword with the banners of war behind him. And that is kind of fake when it comes to what the show actually is.
I agree. Yeah, I do feel like, and I did get the sense when I was watching it that the advertising was misleading, that it did put the show up as one of those big military epics of the past. Again, Kingdom of Heaven, Last Samurai, use those as examples. When it's really not that at all. It is a political intrigue show through and through with very little combat, very little violence, and it's better for that. Because we got plenty of those big epic battle things already. Human intrigue is so much more interesting.
Yeah, and a lot of the violence, especially towards the end of this show, is just ritual suicide.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
or honestly, Mariko's attempt at suicide by trying to leave.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. Although the one Toranaga samurai, the 2 guys were like, "Oh, we're gonna stop you," and she's like, "Hey, kill those guys," and he just walks up and just like takes them out in like 10 seconds. They're like, "Whoa, this is good," but then he just gets shot with an arrow. So it shows. I think the show shows the fragility of life as well.
Sure,
is that you can be the most like badass samurai, and some dude from like 100 yards away just shoots you with an arrow, and that's it. All your skills.
Well, it's also just a line between life and death for a lot of people. The theme of fate being so pervasive. I think what's so interesting about the end of this is that we know that there is going to be a giant battle where presumably thousands and thousands of people are going to die. But what's crazy is it doesn't matter if they die or not, Noah, because the outcome has already been predetermined. That's fucked up.
Yeah. or even the Toranaga's son slipping on a rock and hitting his head and dying that way. Just the sort of twists of fate that happen. So it's an interesting show from that category as well. Yeah. We did get to see John Blackthorne be a little bit of a cool like gun and blade wielder for a little bit, which was neat to see. He knew what he was doing with the pistol, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So this show had a couple good action moments, I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, but they were appropriately paced and like
yeah.
I thought they fit in nicely with the overall show, and they fit in nicely with the character drama too, because the action sequences were about the characters fundamentally.
One thing that I really like when shows or movies do is they show a character when a character really gets to show off their skill in a certain way, because that really gives you something to latch onto for that character, and when it comes to action type things, you get to show your character excelling at their particular style of action, right? So when he is going through the hallway and he's listening through the wall and he like does the exact right shot, and then he like reaches through the hole and he pulls the other guy and like shoots him through the wall where his head would be and all that. You're like, you get to see a little bit of his high level of skill in terms of musket play. So
tell them to move back.
Yeah, I think is that a term? Musketeering, musket play,
single shot gunplay.
That's right. Yeah, is play the right word there? I don't know. Sword. We say sword play.
So it would be gunplay, right? It would be gunplay, but musket play is appropriate, I think, for the time.
That was the name of my punk band in high school, so I thought I'd just use it here. We were called Musket Play.
It's a good name.
It is. But anyway, so that was neat. So I'm glad that we got that opportunity to see John Blackthorne show off his skills in a certain area. That was neat. because the entire show he feels like a fish out of water who, you know, is not in his element. And for that one scene, he seemed very much in his element in a combat sense. So that was neat.
Anyway, watch this show. It's really good. You will enjoy it. It's a great show to talk about with your friends. I think it's easily consumed because we know it's only the one season and the 10 episodes. So absolutely worth your time, this one.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It's one of my favorite shows that we watched on this show.
Sure.
And it's not science fiction or fantasy, you know?
It's alternate reality historical drama, which I guess is now going to fall into our purview.
Well, alternate reality is fantasy to a certain extent. Yeah, it is. It is an imaginary, even if it's an imaginary telling of historical events, it's fantasy. Shogun, great fantasy series.
All right, guys. We are going to go back in time for the next episode of Nerd Legion. So we are going to do X-Men 97 when it completes. However, it is not going to be, the last episode is not going to be out for another couple of weeks. So we're going to wait for the actual story arc to complete for that show before discussing it. So next week, while we are waiting for that to happen, we have decided, or Doa has decided, and I have agreed, that we are going to go back to David Lynch's 1984 Dune and watch that film, which does have some very, very hilarious parts to it, including Sting in leather underwear, that you will definitely want to tune in for.
Patrick Stewart holding a gun in one hand and a pug in the other.
I'm just saying, guys, if you have watched the recent Dune movies, so first off, you've probably seen some of David Lynch's films or, you know, TV shows, Twin Peaks, right? David Lynch is a brilliant director. And this is not his best film, but it is very interesting if you guys have been reading Dune or watching the new Dune movies to kind of go back to at this point in time, because it actually holds up better than you might think. And for 1984 is pretty technically impressive.
It's a really, I haven't seen it for a very long time, but I remember it being weird and fun, and I'm really looking forward to getting a chance to watch it again. I would encourage all of you out there to go before the next episode comes out, before that one comes out, go watch it. So you're on the same page. It's going to be good. Long live the fighters. Yeah.
And you know, many of you will know David Lynch from his other films or Twin Peaks. I mean, he goes on to, you know, he goes on to create Mulholland Drive, which is considered probably one of the best films ever made. So
I haven't seen that one either. Are there lightsabers in it? No, I guess not. I'll have to get a Rebel Moon for that. Kill her.
So we will watch Dune 1984 next time, and we'll follow it up the next episode with X-Men 97. We will catch you guys later.